Gentlemen, appreciate you coming on today. Excited to bring the PR people on camera, not muted, not sitting behind the scenes,
Yeah.
and give us the full rundown. So, Seth, John, appreciate you hopping on today.
Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
I guess give us the rundown. Why start a sports tech focused at first PR firm? How did you two meet? What's the origin story of the branded agency?
Yeah, so I think, and John certainly has his half of the story to tell, but for us, John and I decided to go off on our own. We had a pre-existing relationship. And as any startup does, you need to find that niche entry point, right? You can't just sort of boil the ocean, so to speak. You have to identify an area in which you can really make a difference and an immediate difference, because in our business, client success stories are what help fuel our growth. It's all about the case studies. And when we looked at our backgrounds, and I can speak to mine in particular, it really was very sports heavy. So before starting Branded, I spent a decade as a sports writer. I was on staff with the Chicago Sun-Times. I primarily covered Big Ten football and basketball, but served in a backup capacity or in sort of a sidebar capacity. The Bears game day coverage team, did some Blackhawks road trips, was on the road with the Bulls. And my experience was multimedia in nature. I hosted a podcast myself. I spent time guest hosting on The Score, which is one of the two all sports radio stations here in Chicago, and also spent 6 years on TV on NBC Sports Chicago. So had a really good grasp of the space from an editorial perspective. And as somebody who sat and saw a lot of pitches that didn't necessarily land or weren't topical or altogether irrelevant to my beat, felt like personally, at least as my half of the co-founding team went, could really bring a lot of value to sports tech startups that were looking to generate a lot of awareness through some of these communications channels. And then I throw it to John to tell his half of the story.
Yeah, so I actually started my career on the sports marketing and publishing side, working for a company called Team Marketing Report for several years. From there, I jumped right into PR. Had joined a national tech agency called SSPR. And this was right when sports tech started to become a thing. We had, the boom of mobile apps devoted to sports, everything going online for booking tickets and tee times and so forth. And then, of course, the wearable movement to improve athlete performance. So had the opportunity to just start working with companies in the space while I was at this agency, and absolutely loved it. Being a sports fan and just following these writers and these companies on my own, it just became a passion of mine. Ultimately was able to start that agency's sports tech practice and knew that working within sports was something that I was going to want to do throughout the rest of the career. And obviously with Seth's background, sports was just a no-brainer for us to start there.
Yeah, and I appreciate you giving context, and I don't want to put you in a box either. Obviously, I see one side of your business, which is the PR side, and so that's naturally. But what's the full scope of everything you do? I guess just to set the groundwork before we go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, sure. We typically silo our services in three main vertical areas. The first is public relations, and I think what many people are used to when they experience or see public relations is, let's get the word out. Get me covered in ESPN. Get me covered in Sports Business Journal or Front Office Sports, and on and on and on. But it really is more than that. I think public relations is all about cultivating a story and a narrative that ultimately points to your solution, right? Your technology, your company is solving a problem. Beyond that, there's certainly crisis communications, which is certainly an area that we don't necessarily want to see our clients involved in, but it inevitably happens. And then things like corporate reputation, which are a little bit of an expansion of telling that brand story and that brand strategy. The second area is content marketing, and we say we can create anything on the internet. We have the ability to produce viral videos, support podcast development, organic social content, influencer relations, paid social content. And that is certainly a burgeoning area, and that people are recognizing that the channels through which you can tell that story are so multidimensional that they want to activate as many of them as possible. And then the third area is brand strategy. And that's a little bit more general. Generally speaking, though, for us, it's revolved around acquisitions and folding an existing brand into a larger parent company or a larger acquiring brand, or developing a go-to-market strategy for a new startup that maybe has enough seed funding to work with us. I would say those are the three main areas that we work in. And as just an overall treatise on the question, what we do is just so much more than reaching out to journalists and asking them if they want to cover our client. That's really kind of a very narrow part of the spectrum, even of public relations. And I think you look on our website, which is newly redesigned, and what we really wanted to get to was the heart of storytelling, right? It's being able to tell that brand story. It's being able to push out a narrative, as I said earlier, that ultimately creates a need for your company. And that's sort of the big picture, the thesis of what we do.
Yeah, and from I don't want to call it a case study perspective, but from some of the best, and I know all your clients are, you treat them like your own kids and what they are, and you want to keep them. But like, do you have any, I guess, examples of just perfectly executed, maybe over a long time period, of hitting different areas to go through, just to, add to the story, give people sort of an example instead of just keywords of one that just like the flow of the story?
Yeah, happy to jump in with one on my side. Been working with ticket marketplace, TickPick, for many, many years. Started out with them when they were just hitting the market really, and they've been with us for quite a while. And what we've been able to do for them has really just amplified their brand and turned them into a known entity within the ticket marketplace. Everybody knew StubHub and some of these others, but TickPick, we help them break through the space by doing some things differently. They started as the first no-fee marketplace, and that was messaging that in all of our outreach and connections with journalists was something that we would continue to hammer. Something like that ultimately led to their CEO being on a panel with President Biden talking about junk fees. So, to Seth's point about the storytelling and the impact, that's something you see how the press really builds. And with them, we've just built an ongoing campaign using the sports news cycle and the entertainment news cycle and figuring out the storylines, what's driving demand, also pushing out TickPick as a thought leader. They recently raised, actually in August, a $250 million growth investment from Brighton Park and participation from Rory McIlroy's Symphony Ventures in an exit event as well. And so that was really exciting, something that's on that specific case study, and just shows how working together for years and this consistent drumbeat of press is what ultimately equates to growth and success.
I can add a couple more just to provide a little bit more dynamic so that your listeners can kind of get a sense for how we impact not only clients over the long term, but the short term too. Another client that's been with us for quite some time is Greenfly, which I like to say, if you follow any major league, any major team, any major athlete on any social platform, and you run into their content, it's Greenfly delivering it. If you're a sports fan, it's hard pressed to open up social media application and not run into content that Greenfly was in part responsible for delivering to you. And they came to us wanting to tell that story, and they hadn't really necessarily found their stride from a comms perspective, but through some thought leadership that revolved around really evangelizing the narrative of short form content. So helping business decision makers with leagues and teams understanding the value of a photo or a 30-second video, and how that can add value to a franchise, how that can create additional ad inventory and new revenue streams, how you can support athletes and their personal growth and their brand growth, is the story that we wanted to tell. And I think we've been successful in doing so. And even to put a bow on that, I'd say, and I'm of the opinion that a lot of the growth you're seeing in team valuations is at least in part attributable to these leagues and teams and players really gaining a better understanding of how to use short form content. And Greenfly has certainly enabled that. The other client that I'll offer up is one that's been with us, actually just came on a few months ago. It's Go Route. They're coach to player communication. And I think they certainly sensed an opportunity with the news cycle to really make a little bit more noise. And what we've done is taken conversation around what you're seeing at the NCAA level with the in-helmet radios, both on offense and defense. Obviously looking at the evolution of coach to player communication in the NFL, going from radio to cellular technology. We've used that to really promote Go Route as that best-in-class coach to player communication technology, and really championing the advantages of introducing technology to games like this. Understanding that if you run a no-huddle offense, you're not only going to be more efficient and it might help you win more ball games, but it also produces a better product for the viewer. They're getting to see more plays, less downtime, et cetera. So that continues to evolve. I think with all our clients, we're always aiming higher. I think just given that that's a little bit of a newer relationship, we're only starting to see that one blossom into, let's say, a Greenfly-like case study or a TickPick-like case study. But it does give you an example of, within the sports tech space, how we can drive an impact pretty quickly.
What I love too about it was just going to add on top of Seth. What I love too about it, we've had the opportunity to work with so many different types of sports tech companies. When you think about on the fan engagement side or the fantasy sports side, there's so many different, subsets of sports tech, and it's really kept things interesting for us and excited about the space, and getting to work with brands like a WSC Sports, for example, or a Sleeper or a Shot Tracker, all of these who are sports tech powerhouses in their own area. So just wanted to add that as well. And I think that's what's exciting about where the industry's going forward.
Yeah, and something else I want to call out, and it's super cool, and a lot of people take this for granted, but you're not per se a VC type. We have a lot of the companies that are raising VC money and all this, but you both are founders as well. Like, you had to build a company, and so you're helping build other people's, but you're building your own, right? How did you manage that? How did you go about even scaling your own agency and adding clients and delivering? What did that balance look like? Because we have a ton of people on the we'll call it more the service side that are trying to balance that, whether it's PR, social media, or whatever it is within sports. There's a ton of ancillary things around that.
Yeah, I certainly think that in a service business, you're at a little bit of an advantage because you don't necessarily need cash to grow. Eventually you do as you scale your staff, and we've certainly reinvested some of the cash into growing that staff. But a lot of it just came out of our heads. So initially, what John and I really needed to do, and we talked about it a few minutes ago, was sell that background. Sell this idea that John had the foresight to launch a sports tech practice at another agency and has really been involved in this deeply since day one, and that I bring this other perspective of having covered these leagues, teams, players, have these relationships. But beyond that, I think it's really having success with your early clients. As the adage goes, most startups don't last very long. We're working on our 7th year in business as an agency. And I think when you're early on, the margin for error, and I still believe now, especially since we work with sports tech startups that need to make every dollar move, the margin for error is razor thin. So you really need to execute at a high level. But I think as far as growth, And as far as sort of our growth trajectory to date, having executed and developed those case studies has allowed us to grow and expand. So there are certainly clients that are very sports heavy within our sports tech practice, but even those sit at intersections. You look at a TickPick, the intersection of sports and e-commerce. You look at a Greenfly, the intersection of sports and marketing. You look at some of our health tech startups that we've worked with in the past, like a Proteus Motion or an Uplift Labs. Those two sit at the intersection of performance and health and fitness. And I think sitting at those intersections has allowed us to identify other areas of growth as well. So as it relates to our growth, what we found was that many of our clients sit at intersections. John gave the TickPick example. That's sports and e-commerce. Some of the performance technologies that we've worked with, like an Uplift Labs or a Proteus Motion. You look at a Proteus Motion, they're now in some Equinoxes, right? Originally used by elite athletes, college athletes, but have since been able to break through into more of that general consumer health and wellness. I think an Uplift Labs too has that kind of potential, using, let's say, Major League Baseball or soccer or Olympic sports or whatever it is as a proving ground and an endorsement to ultimately roll out a technology to consumers focused on health and wellness is something that we see a lot in that health and wellness space or that sports tech space. So I think somewhat this lack of definition has really helped us because all of our clients sit at these intersections. Sports tech, I think, is a way certainly to define yourself. It's a way to raise money. It's that niche entry point that I talked about just a few minutes ago, but it's by no means the ceiling. And I think in conjunction with our clients, a lot of these partnerships, a lot of our most successful partnerships are representative of us being able to define these companies and tell a story that goes beyond just the confines of specifically the sports space.
And when you start to then, you talk about start niche, right? And the same thing for a service business or more tech business. You know, how did you then start to, and I know some of them sit at that intersection, what you were talking about, but then you start to expand into clients that maybe don't have much of a sports angle. You know, how did you go about that or when did you even know is the right time to start to expand?
Yeah, well, my background, I was sports tech. Eventually, it came from the tech world, so was able to use that, just the general tech, to our advantage as well. And some of the clients had previously worked with. So as we were going beyond the sports, just drawing from that experience that I had, on the tech agency side. And when we saw the opportunity, it was that we, were a bigger team. We had more of our, systems and processes in place, and we wanted to grow. And we were seeing great success in the sports side. I'd say particularly with retention, which for any company who's ever worked with an agency before, if you've had a good or bad experience, retention is what ultimately matters. Built that up and saw opportunities to bring some of the things that were successful with our sports tech clients just into other verticals, into HR, into marketing tech, et cetera.
Yeah, what I will say is, too, as John sort of alluded to, it goes back to the notion of these intersections. Somebody could look at a TickPick case study and certainly see that we're qualified to represent any e-commerce company. Somebody could look at a Greenfly case study and see that we're very qualified to work with any marketing technology. So that really is sort of at the root of it. But for those people, I think, who might be listening to this, and you alluded to this idea that some people might be just starting up or might be just thinking about an idea, there is somebody out there that's willing to take a chance on you. And I think a lot of talented decision makers probably somehow balance bringing in somebody with a little bit more experience and taking a chance on somebody with a little less. I think I guess the way to put that in the context is to win a Super Bowl, you need to take a risk on a lot of guys on rookie deals, right? You need to put them in positions to try to be successful. A lot of Super Bowl teams start third and fourth round draft picks that may be in their second, third, or fourth year, but just pop. At the same time, it's important to have veteran leadership. So I think we think about those things in the same way.
And I was going to say, so take money out of it, which is obviously why as companies get bigger, it gets easier to work with you. But, I'm sure you guys have a selection process as well. Like, are you ever turning down clients, or what sort of where it's a sweet spot as well for branded, again, taking sort of the money, if people have the budget to do it, out of it?
Well, I think we want to identify clients that we too can grow with. We want clients with us on a recurring monthly basis, ideally, and we want to be able to make a material impact on their business. So if it's something very, very niche, where the group of decision makers numbers, let's say, in the tens and not the hundreds, and we've seen that come across our desk, they're probably not right for our services, because our services are intended to commercialize a brand to an audience that has a mass number of people. So it can certainly be in the hundreds. I think when you're working in sports tech, for example, and let's say there's a director of performance who's that ultimate decision maker, or even a general manager, there are only so many of those globally. But we know and understand that there are certain publications that we can use to, again, tell that story that causes that general manager to say, hey, I should think about bringing on this technology. It's going to help me evaluate talent better. It's going to help me develop talent better. It's going to help my manager or bench coach identify what the appropriate strategy is in a given game. So I see it really on the basis of, are you just too niche to use marketing services? John may have a different perspective.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you said about, being too niche. And I think even more broad, we need to be able to have an impact on our client's business, and to bring on a client where press coverage isn't going to help them get to where they want to be, or content marketing isn't going to really move the needle for them. It's just not a good fit. So we want to be able to have meaningful impacts on our clients with many of the case studies that, we had talked about earlier on. So those are the types that we look for. Always interested in seeing what other technologies are out there, though. The innovation in this space, it's wild. I mean, when you look at like what a Cosm is doing, for example. So just always interested in seeing what else is out there, though.
Yeah, and for advice for companies just getting going that know they're going to want to have services that a branded can offer, from the PR, content, whatever, later, how do you get there? How do you do it yourself? Or what's sort of the advice you would give to someone to get, as they're working toward getting to the point where they can shoot a lot of it to you guys, but they need to create some in the meantime on themselves? Like what are some best practices or tips?
Yeah, I will say that one of the reasons John and I identified our areas of service is because they are very difficult to do in-house when you get to a certain size. With that said, I agree with the notion of the fact that you have to try when you don't have the money to be able to work with an agency. And I think it really revolves around taking a step back, or what I like to say is gaining higher altitude on the industry that you're in, on your competitors, and again, understanding how to tell your story, understanding how to communicate those pain points. I think rightfully so, if you're a founder, you should be pretty drunk on the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and have a very firm belief that you have something special or you're creating something special. But one of the things that we're paid to do is really to provide that global outlook. We're successful because we give our clients a very honest assessment as to where they sit in market and what's unique about them, what's not, what's marketable, what's not. what's newsworthy, what's not. And I think I would say, and don't mean for this to get too philosophical, but I would say that it's important to be really, really honest about where you stand, because that honesty is going to shine in your communications. And then more tactically speaking, I would say start blogging, get some content on your website. It can only help you from an SEO perspective, and it'll help hone your communication skills. It'll help you sort of organically tell that brand story. And if you're doing that, when you're ready to work with an agency like us, you'll be able to take even more advantage.
And I think too, from my perspective, it's hustling. It's figuring out how can you get, that first press placement on your own. What's it going to take? Trying different things. It's not really a sustainable strategy longer term, but when you're working with this, without a marketing budget, just working your connection, seeing what's out there and trying to build up that footprint. What we see with our clients too, and this is on larger scale campaigns, it's press begets press. So when you can start having that footprint, it's going to validate you with other journalists, and more people are going to be willing and wanting to talk to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why the rich get richer and the wins and the compounding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess close this out. I mean, you sit at a cool intersection of sports and the broader ecosystem. I know we've touched on a few throughout, but any other trends you're seeing having working? I always say, this is putting my investor hat on a little bit, but people often want to go to people so close to the fire for insights or where they're thinking. But I think some of the people that know the spaces the best are the service firms or the groups that work across multiple and know the inner workings to a good degree. And so someone like yourself, you guys have a very good scope on the market, seeing every different corner of it. So, what are you seeing in sports as a whole? What's exciting to you? What areas are you keeping an eye on that you think have some real growth ahead of it over the next, we'll just call it, couple years?
Yeah. On my side, one of the things that I'm pumped about too is to see with some of the XR technology, how that's going to change both the fan experience and also even, athlete development. I think it's really cool what Status Pro is doing with, their VR game. And I think as the headsets become more and more viable and more accessible, I think that's going to be a major area within sports tech. It's the AR, the XR, the VR, et cetera, and creating a better overall experience and more realistic experience, whether it's on the gaming side or on the consumption side, like with a Cosm, for example. So those are things that I just can't wait to see what happens.
I think if I were to pick one, the challenge that we see universally across the sports startup and sports tech space is you need to be able to identify a total addressable market that transcends sports. And that's part of our challenge as an agency is we have to help develop a communication strategy that showcases to investors. And I know that was sort of at the heart of your question, but that showcases to investors why you should invest in a company and why it's going to grow several times over and break through that glass ceiling of sports. You asked about our case studies. I think many of our clients, that our most successful clients, have been able to do that. TickPick, for example, they also sell concert tickets. So they're now into other events. Sports certainly dominates the events calendar when you have 162 baseball games and 82 NBA games, and the NFL season is a bit shorter, but on and on and on. But there are still concerts. There's a concert season that TickPick is very active in. I think you look at a Proteus Motion, showcasing why they're not just applicable to elite athletes, but looking at trends related to health and fitness and the popularization of GLP-1s. I'm talking about Ozempic, Wegovy, et cetera. And sort of, I think, an embrace, particularly amongst what I would say is our millennials on down, to live healthier lifestyles and consider how are they working out? What are they doing? Proteus Motion has really successfully communicated that they can be part of that journey. I think you look at a Greenfly too. They've been able to identify areas outside of sports where their technology can be impactful. And I think universally, and we talk to portfolio managers, VCs, angel investors all the time, especially when we do funding announcements, and that is universally what they pinpoint as critical to any, again, sports startup or sports technology.
Yeah, and I appreciate both those answers. Super insightful. For anyone that picks those up, there's a lot of gold in there that we won't dig deeper into, but could for a long time. So Seth, John, appreciate you coming on first off, but let people know where can they find